When I first moved to our quiet little street, everything felt new and unfamiliar. The houses looked similar, with their neatly trimmed lawns and small white fences, but I didn't know the people who lived behind those doors. Everyone seemed to mind their own business, and the street was often so silent that you could hear the wind rustling through the trees. One house, however, stood out. It was right next to mine, and it had the most beautiful garden I had ever seen. There were roses in bright reds and soft pinks, sunflowers that stretched toward the sky, and daisies that danced in the breeze. The air always smelled sweet because of those flowers, like a touch of spring even on cloudy days. The house belonged to an old man named Mr. Johnson. He was 55 years old and lived there all by himself. I would often see him early in the morning, kneeling in his garden with a small watering can in one hand and a pair of gardening gloves on. His back was bent, and his face was worn, but there was something peaceful about him. Still, there was a sadness in his eyes. He would look up now and then, gazing at the street as if waiting for someone to walk by and say hello. But nobody ever did. He reminded me of a tree that stood strong but lonely in the middle of a field, reaching out to the sky but never quite touching anything. I didn't know much about him, but I could tell he didn't have many visitors. There was a quietness about his house, a stillness that only comes from being alone. It made me wonder what his story was, why he lived there all by himself, and what had made him so solitary. Every time I passed his garden, I thought about saying hello, but I always hesitated. What if he didn't want to talk? What if he thought I was being nosy? So, I just admired his flowers from a distance and kept to myself. One bright and cheerful afternoon, the sun was shining so warmly that it felt like the perfect day to do something meaningful. For weeks, I had been thinking about how I could make a difference in someone's life. I had just finished my training to become an elderly care therapist, a job that wasn't just about helping people, it was about truly connecting with them, understanding their stories, and being there when they needed someone the most. As I sat by my window, looking out at the quiet street, my eyes landed on Mr. Johnson's house. His beautiful garden was in full bloom, and the colors of the flowers seemed to glow under the sunlight. I thought about the old man who lived there alone, and an idea started to form in my mind. Why not start with someone right next door? I thought, feeling a spark of excitement. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to put my training into action, and Mr. Johnson could probably use some help or at least some company. I grabbed my notepad, the one I always use to jot down ideas and plans, and took a deep breath. Then, I put on my best smile, the kind that said, "I'm here to help," and stepped out the door. As I walked toward his house, my heart was racing just a little. What if he didn't want my help? What if he thought I was being too forward? But I pushed those thoughts aside. Sometimes, taking the first step is the hardest part, and I was determined to try. The short walk to his front door felt like a journey, and as I stood there, I noticed little details I hadn't before. His front porch had a charming, old-fashioned swing, and there was a small birdhouse hanging from a tree nearby. It all looked so peaceful, yet so lonely at the same time. With my notepad in one hand and my courage in the other, I knocked on his door. The sound echoed slightly, and I waited, feeling the seconds stretch out. When the door finally opened, there he was, Mr. Johnson. He looked at me with a mix of surprise and curiosity. His face, lined with years of life's ups and downs, softened as he noticed my smile. "Hello," I said brightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm your new neighbor, and I just finished my training as an elderly care therapist. I was wondering if you might need some help around here." For a moment, he just stood there, his hand resting on the edge of the door, as if weighing my words. His expression was thoughtful, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to understand my intentions. The seconds felt longer, and I wondered if I had said the wrong thing. Then, slowly, his face softened, and a smile began to spread across his lips. It wasn't just any smile, it was the kind that seemed to light up his entire face, reaching his eyes and making them twinkle. It was warm, genuine, and kind, like the sun breaking through a cloudy sky. He took a step back, leaning slightly against the doorframe, and looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "Well," he said in a steady yet cautious voice, "I appreciate you coming over. But tell me, how exactly do you think you can be of help to me?" His question caught me off guard for a moment, But I quickly realized it wasn't meant to dismiss me. It was his way of trying to understand what I had to offer and why I was there. I felt a spark of determination rise within me. "Well, Mr. Johnson," I began, holding my notepad a little tighter, "I'm trained to assist older adults with day-to-day tasks, whether it's light chores around the house, organizing things, or even just keeping company and having meaningful conversations. I could help you with your garden if it's getting a bit too much to manage, or maybe run errands if you need anything. And if you ever feel like sharing your stories, I'd be more than happy to listen." I paused, looking at him to see how he'd react. His eyes softened further, and I could see that he was thinking deeply about my words. I added gently, "Sometimes, it's just nice to have someone to talk to, isn't it? Someone who can listen and help make life a little easier." He nodded slowly, as if my words had struck a chord. "That does sound nice," he said thoughtfully. "You know, my back has been giving me trouble lately, and I haven't been able to tend to the garden like I used to. And it has been a while since I've had someone to share my stories with." His voice trailed off, and I could see a hint of vulnerability in his expression. It wasn't easy for him to admit that he needed help, but his openness showed that he was willing to try. "Well then," I said with a warm smile, "how about we start with the garden? You can tell me what needs to be done, and we can take it from there." He chuckled softly, a sound that felt like the first step toward something good. "All right," he said, moving aside to let me in. "Come on in, and let's talk." In that moment, I knew I had taken the first step toward something meaningful, not just helping Mr. Johnson, but building a connection that could brighten both of our lives. We stepped inside, and the atmosphere of Mr. Johnson's home wrapped around me like an old blanket. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, probably from a candle or potpourri, and the walls were adorned with pictures that hinted at a life once filled with people and laughter. He gestured toward a worn but comfortable-looking armchair, inviting me to sit. He took his place on the sofa across from me, leaning slightly forward, his hands resting on his knees. "Well," he began, his voice carrying a hint of both pride and sadness, "I suppose you'd like to know a bit about me." I nodded, offering an encouraging smile. "Only if you'd like to share, Mr. Johnson. I'm here to listen." He sighed, his gaze drifting toward a picture frame on the side table. It held a photo of a young couple, him and a woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile. He picked it up, his fingers brushing against the glass as if trying to hold onto a memory. "This is Margaret," he said, his voice softening. "She was my wife. We were married for 30 years, but she passed away 5 years ago. Cancer." There was a pause, and I could see the weight of his words settle in the room. "I'm so sorry," I said quietly, not wanting to interrupt but needing to acknowledge his loss. He nodded, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. "She was my world. After she was gone, the house felt empty. Too quiet. My friends tried to keep me company at first, but as time went on, they had their own lives to live. And here I am." He leaned back, his eyes scanning the room as if he could still see the life that once filled it. "It's funny," he continued, his tone growing reflective. "When you're young, you think you have all the time in the world to make friends, to build connections. But as you get older, those connections start to fade, and you're left with memories." I listened intently, feeling the weight of his loneliness but also the resilience in his voice. "That's why I spend so much time in the garden," he added, his face brightening just a little. "It's my way of staying connected to something alive, something beautiful." "That garden is amazing," I said, hoping to lift his spirits. "It makes the whole street look and smell incredible. You've really done something special out there." He chuckled softly, the sound like a small crack of light in a dark room. "Thank you. It's been my therapy, I suppose. But even the garden gets hard to manage these days." I leaned forward, my notepad forgotten in my lap. "Mr. Johnson, it's okay to feel lonely, but you don't have to go through it alone. Sometimes, just talking and sharing these memories can make a big difference." He looked at me, his expression filled with both gratitude and something else, hope, maybe. "You know," he said after a moment, "I think having someone to talk to might not be so bad after all." And just like that, the conversation shifted. We began talking about his travels, his favorite books, and even the dreams he once had of becoming an artist. The heaviness in the room started to lift, replaced by the warmth of shared stories and a growing connection. As I listened, I realized that this was more than a conversation. It was the beginning of something meaningful for both of us. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant, as if looking into a past only he could see. His hands clasped tightly together, and for a moment, I thought he might not continue. But then, he drew a deep breath and spoke, his voice tinged with both sorrow and acceptance. "You know," he began softly, "Margaret and I always dreamed of having a family. We talked about it endlessly when we first got married. We imagined a house full of laughter, tiny feet running through the halls, and the joy of watching our children grow." He paused, his eyes flickering to the photo of his late wife on the table. "But life doesn't always go as planned. Margaret, she couldn't have children. We tried everything, doctors, treatments, even prayers, but it just wasn't meant to be." I stayed silent, letting him share his story without interruption. His voice grew quieter, as though speaking these words brought back the ache he'd carried for so long. "At first, we were heartbroken, both of us. But Margaret, she had this way of looking at life. She said, maybe we weren't meant to have children of our own, but we can still have a full life together. And we did, for a while." He swallowed hard, his emotions barely hidden. "When she passed away, I thought about remarrying. Everyone said I should, that it would be good for me, that it might ease the loneliness. But," he shook his head slowly, a faint, bittersweet smile crossing his lips, "it didn't feel right. Margaret wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend, my partner in everything. Replacing that, I couldn't even imagine it." His eyes met mine, filled with a mix of vulnerability and strength. "So, I decided to stay on my own. Maybe it's not what others would have done, but it felt right for me. I poured my energy into my garden, my little sanctuary, and I've made peace with the life I have." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of his story but also filled with admiration for his resilience. "That's a lot to carry, Mr. Johnson," I said gently. "But it sounds like you've found a way to honor her memory and keep moving forward." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds years of wisdom and acceptance. "I try. Some days are harder than others, but I remind myself that Margaret wouldn't want me to dwell on the sadness. She'd want me to find joy in the small things, in the flowers blooming, the birds singing, and the kindness of a neighbor like you." His words stayed with me, a reminder of the quiet strength it takes to keep living and loving, even after loss. For the first 2 weeks, things went smoothly between Mr. Johnson and me. I visited him regularly, helped him around the house, and listened to his stories. Our conversations were light and pleasant, and he seemed to enjoy having someone to talk to. I felt good about the work I was doing, knowing it was making a difference in his life. But as the days passed, I began to notice small moments that made me uneasy, little things he said or did that felt just a bit too personal. A lingering touch when I handed him something or compliments that felt overly familiar. He didn't cross any obvious lines, but the subtlety of his actions left me feeling unsettled. I thought about it a lot, wondering if I was reading too much into it or being unfair. After all, he was lonely, and I was the first person to show him consistent kindness in a long time. But deep down, I knew I had to draw a line, for his sake as well as mine. So, I made a decision. I would continue to help him and be there for him as a neighbor and caregiver, but nothing more. No extra closeness, no deeper bond beyond what was professional and appropriate. I needed to protect not just my comfort but also the integrity of the relationship we had built. It wasn't an easy choice. I knew it might hurt his feelings if he sensed the shift, but I also understood the importance of setting boundaries. I reminded myself of what my mom had said: kindness doesn't mean losing yourself or compromising your own well-being. With this resolution in my heart, I approached each visit carefully, keeping things warm but professional. I stayed focused on the tasks at hand, avoided situations that might lead to discomfort, and gently steered conversations toward neutral topics. Over time, I noticed a change in Mr. Johnson too. He seemed to respect the invisible boundary I had created, and our interactions became more balanced. I realized that by standing firm in my decision, I wasn't just protecting myself, I was also helping him find a healthier way to connect and appreciate companionship. Looking back, I felt a sense of relief and pride in my choice. Sometimes, The most compassionate thing you can do is to honor your own limits while still offering kindness and support. And that's exactly what I chose to do with Mr. Johnson. At first, everything seemed fine. Mr. Johnson was kind and grateful for my help, and I enjoyed spending time with him. But then, little by little, things started to feel different. His actions became odd. Not blatantly inappropriate, but just enough to leave me feeling uneasy. For example, when I handed him something, a cup of tea, a book, or even his garden tools, his hand would linger on mine longer than necessary. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just being friendly or didn't realize what he was doing. But then there were the hugs. They started off innocent enough, a quick thank you hug after I helped him rearrange some furniture or finished planting flowers in his garden. But over time, those hugs grew longer, tighter, and felt more personal than they should have been. Each time, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I didn't know how to react. I kept telling myself he was just lonely and that I was there to help him. After all, he hadn't done anything outright wrong, right? He was so kind to me, always offering me tea and thanking me for my time. I didn't want to hurt his feelings or make things awkward between us. But as much as I tried to brush it off, that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I started to dread those moments, anticipating when he might touch my hand again or hold on to a hug for too long. I wanted to say something, to let him know that his actions made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to without making it seem like I was accusing him of something terrible. So, I stayed quiet, convincing myself it was part of the job, helping someone who was lonely and just needed a bit of kindness. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep ignoring that feeling. I just didn't know what to do about it yet. One sunny afternoon, I was helping Mr. Johnson in his garden, just like I had many times before. The flowers were blooming beautifully, their bright colors painting the air with a cheerful atmosphere. We were chatting casually about his favorite plants, and for a moment, everything felt normal and pleasant. But then, something unexpected happened. As I handed him a small gardening tool, he suddenly reached out and held my hand tightly. His grip was firm, and it caught me off guard. I looked up to see him staring deeply into my eyes. There was an intensity in his gaze that made me uncomfortable, something I couldn't quite put into words but felt deeply. "You're like the daughter I never had," he said, his voice soft but heavy with emotion. The words themselves seemed innocent enough, but the way he said them, the way he looked at me, it felt off. It wasn't just the words, it was the moment. Something about it made my stomach twist uneasily. I gently pulled my hand away, trying to keep my composure. "Oh, that's sweet of you to say, Mr. Johnson," I said, forcing a smile. "But I just remembered I have something to take care of at home. I should probably head back now." He looked a little surprised, maybe even a bit hurt, but he didn't stop me. "All right," he said, his voice quieter now. "Thank you for helping today." I nodded quickly, gathered my things, and left the garden, my heart beating faster than usual. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't shake the unease I felt. That moment replayed in my mind over and over, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I needed to set clearer boundaries. It was a turning point for me. I realized that even small gestures or comments, when they cross a certain line, can affect how we feel in a relationship. And no matter how kind someone is or how much we want to help, it's important to listen to that little voice inside that tells us when something isn't right.